Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by a very special guest, Rachel Harrison of Rio IP. And today we're going to be talking about all things relating to how to protect your brand. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to give us a little introduction to yourself?
Thank you, Tim. I will. Thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure.
Yes, I'm a trademark attorney, and that's a job that I've had for about 25 years nearly. I've just set up my own business about 12 months ago. Prior to that, I was working for lots of other big law firms and smaller law firms in the city. So
Amazing, huge change.
a massive change, but a good one for me. It suits me at this point to be in that place. So yeah,
And
thanks
a
for having
fun
me.
first year.
And a brilliant first year. Actually, I couldn't have asked for it to go any better. So I'm looking forward to number two.
Brilliant. Well, today we're going to help our audience understand the importance of how to protect your brand, huge issue that often gets overlooked. So I think there's no better place to start than helping us understand that elusive word IP, intellectual property, because I think often it's very misunderstood. So is there any way you can somehow sum up in layman's terms for us non-lawyer folk, what on earth does IP refer to?
Indeed, as you've said, IP refers to intellectual property, and essentially that's the collective term for all of your business's intangible assets, really made up of trademarks, um, patents, where relevant, copyright, and designs.
Yeah. We have a funny story actually about IP, which I haven't even shared with you yet. But New Creative, we've been around for 15 years or so, and prior to that, we were actually called Source UK.
Hmm.
This was back at right at the beginning of our journey, and was one of the reasons I thought this topic would be really interesting to talk about. It's not a story we share very often.
Source,
Um,
sorry, which spelling of source?
Sauces and ketchup.
Hmm.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
all good creative agencies,
Yes,
you're not
yes.
gonna, use a boring, version of
I didn't
sauce. You're gonna
imagine
make
that,
it,
just yeah,
make it as
checking.
creative as possible.
Mhm.
So 2 years into our story, if you like, as an agency, we actually went from being Sarah Klusman Limited, because my lovely wife and co-founder of New Creative is the wonderful Sarah. Um, she started the company, and so of course it was aptly named after her, like we all
Mm.
do when
Mhm.
we go it alone. We then wanted to create the brand, and we created Source UK. Um, and within, I think, a couple of years, we found ourselves in that awkward position, which we can discuss today, where we were approached by another company with a similar name, challenging our brand.
Mm.
And that's why I really wanted to get you on this show today, because I think it's a step so many people can find themselves in. We actually kind of connected through your content, which was aimed at startups, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
So you and I kind of got to know each other through LinkedIn. I'd seen some of your content aimed at startups, people starting their business,
Yeah.
who, we all walk that path, we all go down that route, whatever industry we're in, having to be the person where the responsibility is on us to come up with a business, think of a name. Do we name it after ourselves? Do we do something a bit more creative? And we're all in that sort of no man's land of not really understanding just how important it is to get it right.
Or
So,
that you have to check.
or that you have to
Most people
check.
don't know.
Yeah. So I'll tell a bit more about our story
I'm
at the
looking forward to
relevant
that.
point. But that's a great question. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of our audience. We work with startup businesses all the time. They want to come to us for a rebrand or a logo, or whatever part of the stage they're at in their own journey. When should we be thinking about IP? When does that matter from your perspective?
The ideal time to think about it is before they get to you or when they're with you,
Yeah.
ideally. It almost never happens that way though.
And why do you
Um,
think that is? Just
why don't they do it?
yeah, is that just
Various reasons. People don't know to
yeah,
check. People, most of the time, I find over the years, I've found big, huge companies making this mistake. This is not just small ones.
yeah,
Um, Somebody comes up with a name and they fall in love with it. and they're not willing to move
To let
on
it
from
go.
it. So I often say to people, start with a try not to get hung up on one. It's impossible, actually. People do. Try not to get hung up on one. Come up with a short list. Come up with a long list.
Yeah,
We can make that a short list. And then from the short list, we can sort of dig a bit deeper to see which, perhaps one or two are the most viable options.
yeah,
Sounds a little bit clinical. It sounds like not very creative, but that would stop you falling down that hole,
yeah,
um, of not being able to move forward with the name that you want, or moving forward with it regardless and coming a cropper a bit, maybe 2 years down the road, let's
yeah,
say.
yeah. So obviously there's that negative side, as we found, of, stumbling into an area that we had never ever
Mm.
imagined, which is we accidentally stepped on someone's toes from a brand perspective. But what other reasons should people be thinking about protecting their brand from a trademark perspective, or any other?
Well, yeah, obviously that side, the infringement side, treading on people's toes is a big one. But the flip side is protecting yourself from that very same thing, um, making sure that people don't infringe your rights, don't copy your branding, your content, etc. Aren't sort of free riding on your reputation. In the end, when you've built up so much goodwill with people, you'll see, in the news all the time or in the supermarkets, etc. People always are willing to jump on the back of a popular brand
Yeah,
because it's sales for them and it draws attention. Um, with your IP, you can stop that from happening, and it's really the only way that you can stop it from happening. You have to enforce it.
yeah, yeah,
So, but having it in place in the first place means that you're in a position to do that. And the law offers, in this country at least, offers some comfort if you don't have a registration, a trademark registration, for example,
yeah,
because that there are certain common law rights that you can rely on, but it's a lot more difficult, it's a lot more expensive, and it's a lot more long-winded. So
that's gonna be more time consuming, harder
very, very
work if you
expensive.
haven't got that trademark to fall
Yeah,
back on.
yeah.
Yeah,
And if you've got a trademark registration, quite often it's the same as having a marriage certificate, if you like, as compared with being common law husband and wife or common law partners, because well, the law's probably moved on a bit in that regard,
yeah, yeah,
but it's the difference between having a certificate that you can wave at someone and say stop, or you can wave at someone and say these are my rights and this is what you need to do about it,
yeah,
than going back and having to prove that you've got this reputation and prove that they're, damaging your brand in some way.
yeah. So I'll take you back to the scenario of our brand, which I
Please
think
do.
is going to sound so familiar to so many people, because we all go through this process, and you can help us understand where we went wrong, because I think it will be very similar to what other people do, and what they should be doing differently, and indeed what we should have done differently had we known at the time. So I think it's a good example. So, a couple of years into our business, and we were thinking of changing name, and we looked at words and did, exactly what you did, which is, come up with names, fall in love with one. We came up with Source. Um, we I think, if I think back to it, I think we probably thought about things like Source Design or Source Creative, and things like that. And our first step at that time was probably two pronged. I think we probably went to Companies House to look if the company names were available.
Yes.
And there was a list of other maybe similar names, and we found a way of producing a company name which was a little bit different to some others.
Hmm.
And we went and checked online what domain names are available. Can I buy this? Can I get the .com, the .co.uk? And we landed on what we thought was a pretty happy place. We've checked Companies House.
Yeah.
We can buy, we can set up the company name. We can get the domain names. Happy days. We're going forward with our new business. And that's exactly what we did. And we lived happily in that space for probably 2 years. And then one day we got a letter through with a cease and desist request to say, close your business, or, cease using that name by X date, or we're going to sue. That was the reality.
Mm.
And we were, you know, dumbfounded, really, completely lacking the knowledge and expertise to know how seriously to take it, you know, terrified, scared, all the emotions that go with it at that time, because by then we had been operating with that name for, a period of time.
Yeah.
And we found ourselves exactly in that kind of scary place.
Mm.
So, what should have we done? What if someone is doing exactly this right now? Because I think those are going to be really common steps that people will take when they're
Indeed.
thinking about creating a company. What's the missing ingredients for getting that process right?
Asking me is the missing ingredient,
Yeah,
or somebody like me.
yeah,
Um, Company's House is it's misunderstood in trademark terms
yeah,
because it has no bearing on um, someone else's ability to use a word, for example. Just because there's nobody with your company name, or the one that you want, it doesn't mean that it's available for you to use. Company names can coexist with very minor differences. It doesn't have any impact on whether that is available for either of those. Say that there are two
yeah,
on
yeah, yeah.
on the company's
Absolutely.
register, for example. Let's say it's Source UK and let's say it's Source
Design.
um,
Yeah,
Design. They can sit on Company's House happily together,
yeah,
but whoever was first, from a trademarks perspective, from out there in the marketplace, doing their business, running their business, selling their design services under that brand, really has the sort of senior rights, if you like.
yeah,
The company name means nothing in that regard.
yeah.
The domain name is largely the same.
And
Um,
why are they so like unconnected? Because you would think it almost surprises me, why can Companies House not talk to you know, the IPO or
the,
the trademark body, whatever it might be, and actually have more of a connection? Feels like it could actually prevent people like myself finding themselves in that situation if there was a bit more front-loaded support.
that's an interesting question. Um, I think, for example, your company could be called Source UK, um, but your business might be
Trading
Tim
under another
Lindsay
name.
Design.
Yeah, yeah.
The two don't match. Lots of people trade under a different sort of brand to what the company is called. I mean,
Yeah,
take for example, Unilever
yeah. With all their sub-brands.
with all
Yeah,
their sub brands. A
yeah.
company like that wouldn't have a Dove company, wouldn't have a Vaseline company, and so on.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So it's because of those complexities that actually it's sort of impossible to create that
I think
scenario.
so.
Yeah,
A company and the company name itself gives you, on its own, gives you no rights over um, a particular name.
yeah,
And Companies House won't refuse a name because it's similar to another one.
yeah,
There are exceptions to that, but largely you can sit alongside several other people with the same, not the same name, but
yeah, yeah,
with source, let's say.
yeah, yeah,
And the domain name is the same. It's a bit different because domain names do overlap a bit more with trademarks because now they are so well recognized as being part of the brand. So
yeah.
that's a bit different. But again, a domain name itself doesn't give you
Right.
rights,
Yeah,
yeah, on its own over somebody else.
yeah. So what are those first steps that you would be taking that are gonna make the difference in this
Mm.
scenario to really ensure that, the right checking has been done? What does that consist of?
Well, first of all, there's nothing to stop people doing the searches that you did, and that's the best place to start. Look at the domains and look at Companies House for what it's
Yeah,
worth. Look at Google. That's fine.
yeah,
People need to start there. It's best that they do. They'd be stupid not to because they can do that for free.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but after they've done that, and once they've satisfied themselves that there's nothing that they find problematic, then they ought to seek some advice at that stage.
yeah,
Because it's important, I think, to note that what the business owner or the person looking for this name considers to be problematic and what I might consider to be problematic are two very different things.
yeah, yeah,
Um, you might look for um, the word source. You might look for different spellings of the word source. You might look, think that that's okay because I found one, but I design for this sector
Yeah.
and they design for another sector, and therefore, never the twain shall meet.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just not the case, and they may have rights over all the things that you want to do, all the services that you offer. Um, Probably their rights will overlap,
Yeah.
and the layman is not necessarily in a position to sort of judge. People also go down the road of um, convincing themselves that it's not a problem
Yeah.
when and they were almost too scared to find out that it could be.
So it's too easy to bury your head in the sand, you think?
Often,
And is that a situation that you often find?
all the time,
Yeah.
every single week.
Yeah. And so that's the biggest headache
And I
is
think
people just
that's
ignoring
yeah.
it, hoping it goes away.
And I'm all for people registering their trademark themselves. It's very easy to, or it's very accessible, I should say, to the UK IPO makes it very accessible to file your own trademark application. They
Yeah.
give you a step-by-step guide. Um, but they do a level of searches, but they don't do some, which I will go on to in a second, but they don't do a sort of clearance search to make sure that you're free to go ahead with that and you don't get a cease and desist letter like you did.
Yeah.
So whilst I'm all for cost saving and small businesses do need to sort of try and curb costs, and I understand that
Yeah, of course. Especially at the moment, of course.
at the
Yeah.
moment,
Yeah.
and everybody wants to do it themselves. But I think the best, if you invest anything here, the best investment that you can make is have some clearance searches done.
Yeah.
And if I was doing those, I mean, ideally, you'd start with the long list that we spoke about, and then the short list, and
Yeah.
we'd sort of we'd do step by step stage searches, and I can do identical. We can all do an identical search. We can see if the name exists on the trademarks register. You can do that yourself.
Yeah. So
Um,
some quick ways of quickly eliminating obvious problem areas so that
and
by
you
the
have to know, like, it goes back to my point before. You might assume that because they do some kind of business consultancy and you do design, that they don't overlap.
yeah.
I might have a different view on that.
Yeah.
So it's important to take some advice at that stage, I think.
Yeah.
And it's a risk assessment. I mean, no name these days is without risk,
Yeah.
almost no name. So there's always an element of risk, but it's trying to minimize that and understanding, if I go forward with this, what could happen,
Yeah.
and if that does happen,
Understanding the
what will I
risks
need to do?
ultimately. Yeah.
Mm.
So let's assume that someone has, with your advice, may done all the right steps. Maybe they've done some of that work on their own.
Hmm.
They've, done the company's house bit. They've checked their domains. They've got some support from an IP lawyer like yourself, and you're, in the position to be looking at registering that business, with all the right classes. Is this a hugely lengthy piece of work? How long does something like that take in terms of your involvement working with a company at that sort of stage?
No, ideally, I mean, getting to the point of filing an application, we'd need to look at the goods and services that you would cover,
Yeah.
which are split down into 45 different categories.
Yeah.
It's a bit nuanced sometimes, especially when you're in the sort of software field, and or in the sort of business services spaces. So it's good to have some advice, because people also make the mistake sometimes of going forward with the classes that they think they ought to be in, and may miss some key
Yeah.
goods or services that would have given them.
And sorry to interrupt, do you have to stick quite rigidly to the classes that really relate to your business? Or like, is there anything to stop a company just registering in like 20 classes just because they want to protect some stuff that they might do in the future rather than work they actually do now? Are there rules or anything around that?
Technically, there's nothing to stop them doing that.
Yeah.
They when you In this country, when you file a trademark application, you make a declaration of a genuine intention to use that trademark on all those goods and services.
Yeah.
If you covered 20 classes and you essentially provide design services, you'd probably be overstretching a little bit. That's not to say that you haven't got, ideas of sort of expansion,
Yeah.
and you might want to go into homewares and tobacco.
So could someone use that as a defense against,
Against a
if
third party
yeah,
setting up,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in this country and in most countries, there's a period. In this country, it's 5 years
Yeah.
um, that you have to begin using that trademark, so you can keep it for 5 years.
Right.
And then after 5 years, if Joe Bloggs wants to sort of start using your name, but in relation to a completely different field, it's his prerogative then to do so. And
Yeah.
if you haven't, and then he could cancel your registration for the bits that you haven't used it on.
Yeah. Gotcha. So one of the things we often find is, company comes to us, they want some brand work done. They've already thought about the timeline in their own heads. They're
Hmm.
like, we're coming to you. We need a new name. We need a new brand. We need the whole identity created, and we need it
And we
all
want to
done. But
launch
yeah,
the end of the month.
yeah, 8 weeks.
Mm.
12 weeks. So in order to build this whole process in and do this properly and remove all of that risk that could be, they could be exposed to,
Yes.
how much time should somebody really be factoring in to allow this process to be done professionally and properly? Or is that impossible to say?
No, no. Ideally, at least 6 months.
Yeah,
Longer if you've got it. It doesn't always work like that,
yeah,
obviously. 6 months in the UK, it's quite quick. To your trademark application will be examined quite quick, and by which I mean in a couple of weeks at the moment, which is it's quicker than in most other countries.
yeah,
Um, and after a couple of weeks, you'll know if it's acceptable from a sort of inherent registrability point of view. Is it too descriptive? Is it um, you know non-distinctive? There's two main grounds it will be objected
yeah,
to on. Um, the trademarks office here will also do a search of the register for confusingly similar or sort of overlapping marks,
yeah,
and it will tell you about some of those, but it's absolutely not foolproof and it's not very extensive. But it will tell you about some. So you'll have that examination report within a couple of weeks. Um, all being well, at that point, your application would be published, and it sits in an online trademarks journal for other people to
see that you've
chat to
got,
see.
see,
I mean,
yeah,
nobody actually sees it really, but people have services that watch the trademarks register, and they would be
right,
notified of something being filed that's similar to their own.
gotcha,
And that's the purpose of this. It sits there for 2 months,
yeah.
during which time people
So
can
it could be
challenge it.
challenged, yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
Um, if that passes uneventfully, then your registration in the UK will issue a couple of weeks after that. So
yeah,
3 to 4 months is the absolute minimum to get
yeah,
it through. That's not to say that I always try to sort of drum home the fact that the UK IPO's own searches, like I just said, are not very extensive.
hmm,
People might not be watching the register, third parties might
yeah,
not be watching. They might only know about you. You might have got your trademark registration, notwithstanding theirs is already there. That's similar. They might only know about you in 2 years' time when your website suddenly comes to their attention.
yeah,
And it's still, they can still challenge then, and they can challenge your registration and have it cancelled still at that point, and still at any point.
yeah.
Um, so it's important. The searches that I keep talking about are the
The,
important
the
bit.
fundamental, yeah,
And once you've done the searches, to get your application filed quickly so that those searches don't suddenly become out of date because somebody else has jumped in ahead of you and got has happened. That's
yeah,
quite rare, but that has happened to me. When somebody files a trademark similar to yours that's then stands in your way just the day before you file.
yeah. So for my final question today, let's say everything's gone through, you've got your trademark, you've done that all successfully and properly and professionally with support from someone like yourself. The flip side is then, of course, that you might then see another brand
Yes.
starting to step on your toes. So just very quickly, what do we do in that instance? What are our immediate steps to then start to defend your own brand that you've then invested in,
Yeah.
with a trademark?
Firstly, the best thing that you can do is to keep an eye on it, and it being the marketplace,
So
you're
just
often
constantly have a
yourself
look,
in a
yeah,
best the best place to
Google
see.
searches and
Mm.
see, and
And your
yeah,
staff and people that you know, because people do sometimes come across other people when they're looking for you. That's often how it comes up.
yeah,
You can also, as I've said, put a watch on the trademarks register to make sure that nobody's filing for a trademark
something
similar to
new,
yours.
yeah,
Yeah, because you that's much easier to stop.
yeah,
Um,
before it even happens, yeah,
yeah, um, and then if you do find them, the the best thing that you can do is to have a conversation with them.
yeah,
Um, Perhaps take some advice to find out what your position is, to make sure, because again, what you think is problematic, I might not agree, or I might have a different view on how you approach it.
yeah,
But you can speak to them. You can, and if they're not listening, which often they're not, but you can, we can send them a letter and ask them to stop nicely,
yeah,
politely, perhaps firmly, however, it looks like it's needed. Um, you do have to remember with your trademarks that it's an investment, and you have to police it a bit, and you have to stand up for yourself and enforce it if you're going to keep it for yourself, because
yeah,
people will try and
and
ride on
it's
your
hugely
coattails,
important,
and
yeah,
it's massively important. So you have to sort of acknowledge that you might have to send up letters like that sometimes, and have a little bit of advice, and make an investment in your brand to protect it.
yeah. So there's some really important takeaways there, which, as you've heard from our story today, we ultimately learnt the hard way.
Mm,
But these are all scenarios which are wholly avoidable
yes.
just by taking the right steps. And I think this kind of education piece around the importance of brand is just so important, to ensure that you protect it, to ensure that you think about it at the right stage, to ensure you allow enough time for that to happen, to work
Yeah.
with a professional as yourself, to do all the right checks and searches at the right time, and ultimately ensure that you've got, a brand that is, robust and well protected, and, not going to cost money or cause issues further down the line.
That's
It's
it in
been
a nutshell.
super fascinating. Thank you so much, Rachel. Real pleasure having you on to talk to us today about these issues. Hope there's been some great takeaways for you, for everyone listening today. But thank you. And
Thank you
yeah,
for having
thanks for
me.
coming.